Hi, I'm Cody Wisniewski, Vice President, General Counsel at FPC Action Foundation. Today I'm sitting down with Brandon Herrera. Brandon, thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate you coming down. This is where we do the podcast thing where we pretend like this is our first time greeting each other and we haven't been talking for an hour.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for joining me in your own studio.
No, of course, man. No, thanks for coming down, man. It means a lot that you would come down just to have a conversation with little old me.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. But what I really wanted to talk about was, you're known for your work looking at, guns and gear and doing all of these testing things on firearms. And of course, we'll get into a little bit later that you're a manufacturer yourself. But
100%.
What has been really interesting as of late is this shift to talking more about gun rights and gun regulation and gun laws and how those are impacting everyday people a lot more now. And so really that's why I wanted to sit down with you. And so the first kind of question that I have for you is, what prompted that shift for you? What prompted this focus now on talking more about gun rights and gun regulation as opposed to just guns themselves?
Sure. So guns were always, the main focus of the channel, but you were right. We didn't really delve as much into the politics side of it. The new laws being passed, the new rulings, what's the ATF doing this week? We didn't really follow that as much because, it's kind of important to have that beginning of the funnel. You don't win hearts and minds over by beating people over the head with, well, the Constitution. It's like, yeah, we'll get to that part. But first you have to, show people, especially with firearms, that, hey, guns are cool. It's the tip of the funnel. It's like, guns are cool and you can be safe about them. And that, okay, well, maybe I should buy a gun and why gun ownership is important and why self-defense is important. And then you start going down that rabbit hole. Really, it just became inherently more political. So, I think really what pushed that, not only just for me, but for a lot of other channels and a lot of friends of mine, is it became more overt what some of these government agencies were doing outside of the Constitution. So, I don't know, 10 years ago, it wasn't really a thought in anybody's mind that the ATF would unilaterally change definitions to ban arm braces and bump stocks and whatever the hell. That wasn't really in everybody's face 24/7, but now it is. The last 5 years of this fight has been things like arm braces, which will turn millions of law-abiding gun owners into felons overnight without a law being signed and passed by Congress and signed by the president. That's completely outside of the realm of the Constitution, and that's really kind of changed a lot of this conversation because now not only is gun ownership more than ever inherently political, but people also have to stay up to date on the laws because they could become a felon without even realizing it. And that's kind of a first.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's not even just that, you're looking more at laws and at regulation, but it's also they've kind of just become inextricably connected in a way.
And that's something I get a comment all the time, especially from people that are, not within the United States more often than not, but they say, I miss when this channel wasn't political. Well, I miss when I could be apolitical. Yeah. But the fight for gun rights is inherently a political thing now. It's like, when they stop pushing to end our career, we'll stop talking about it. But until they do that, I'm going to talk about it.
I like that. I always joke that, I'm a gun rights attorney, of course, and, I fight I fight gun cases, I fight for the Constitution, but nothing would ever make me happier than putting myself out of a job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So speaking of that, you've been pretty vocal recently about your views on the ATF.
One could say.
What did you find yourself coming to that for a similar reason? Or was there kind of a shifting moment where you finally realized that this is the time to truly speak out on this issue and against this agency?
Sure. So gradually we of course, like I was saying before, gradually it just became more and more a part of what we did is talk about what the ATF's up to and why they're full of shit. Basically why they don't have the authority to be doing what they're doing and why even if they did it would be wrong is kind of the basis of that. But then one thing led to another, and of course I'm grateful for the platform that I've got now, but I've been able to use that as it's grown to do more good and to catch the attention of people that are, for example, in political office. Like we had Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene asked me to come down and testify against the ATF in a congressional field hearing last year. Yeah. And that's something I was happy to do because that's an area where I'm able to take my platform on YouTube, which, you could say, oh, you're just a YouTuber, you're this, but we were able to get real results. I was able to sit in front of a congressional field hearing and a testimony and give a 5-minute speech about basically what the ATF is doing, why it's government overreach, and why they need to be reined in. And stuff like that can yield real results in the long run. And I'm happy to continue going and doing that. As long as I believe it can be fruitful and keep gun owners out of prison, I'm happy to do it, because that's the end goal. And that's the same thing the FPC is doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the goal is to let peaceable people be able to exercise their rights.
Yeah.
And ATF is certainly standing in the way of that at every turn, and is certainly seeming to become more and more hostile towards gun owners, towards the industry in general.
I think it's mutual.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But it certainly didn't come unprovoked in a sense, right? So, and to that end, it's no secret that you also operate a firearms manufacturing business.
Yes.
The AK guy.
Yes, sir.
What's it like testifying in Congress against the ATF, calling, essentially for the disbandment of the ATF, while operating a business that's regulated by them?
So for one, it gives me a little bit more, I guess, credibility when I am talking about that, like FFL revocations and things, because I know how it all works. I'm an FFL. I know the system.
I am the FFL.
Yeah, I am an FFL. But it also goes a step further, too, because it's kind of like, the joke that everybody makes with, oh, you're talking about the ATF, your dog must be nervous. But instead of dog, it's dogs and employees. Because it's my livelihood. So if these people, I've never known anybody in the government from a 3-letter agency that would be vindictive because of something you said with your freedom of speech.
They certainly would never retaliate.
No.
That would be illegal, in fact.
It would be illegal. And that stops them all the time. Yeah, it's something that's in the back of my mind, but part of me thinks that the more vocal we are about it, and the more I make jokes about it, even in that congressional testimony, I made a joke about I'm expecting my audit soon.
Yeah.
Because, you never know when it comes down the way, but the more we can, whether it puts me in a bad position or not, it's still right.
So to that end, I mean, being the regulated side, while, we've talked a little bit about your experience as an individual, but what have you seen from the ATF on the regulated side? Has the way that they interact with FFLs changed, or, is there a different landscape? I mean, obviously the administration has put in this zero tolerance policy, and there's been that shift there. So have you noticed that side coming from the FFL end?
So me personally, I haven't had any sort of negative ramifications on that front, but it's scary because you're looking down the barrel of a gun, especially with the zero tolerance policy. I think, what was it? You would know better than I, but I think the FFL revocations year over year were up like 500%.
Yeah.
It was something insane, and that's people that are losing their entire livelihood. These are people that, some of the other folks that testified with me at that congressional field hearing, they'd been in business, 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
This is a family business. This was all they had. And the ATF, over a missed dotted I or a missed cross T, something that's a total technicality. They're not just hawking illegal machine guns out of the back, like just a technicality on a 4473, are able to revoke their entire 2-decade-long business. It's insane.
Something that the ATF does in their own rulemakings, mind you, right after they put out a rule. Most people don't follow along after that point, but they'll put out quietly afterwards a correction sheet where they'll fix typos and fix errors. And I always found it really ironic that ATF gets to go back and edit their errors, but then, especially now, FFLs don't have that same opportunity.
They're not held to their own standard.
Enter government.
Right. These are the same cocksuckers who can't build a website, so,
Back to more individuals.
Yeah.
What do you see as kind of the biggest infringement on gun rights today? I know there's a lot to choose from.
Sure.
So we could probably go for about 25 to 30 minutes on this.
Yeah. Well, you want to? Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
So what do you see as kind of the biggest infringement today?
Just because it's so multifaceted and because there's no recourse, I think it's the principle of the ATF getting to decide rule changes, law changes, stuff like that would normally require a bill to be passed by Congress and signed by the president and turned into law. That is no longer the case. They're able to unilaterally decide that something is banned and a felony that they previously approved and said, no, that's good, you can go into production with it and sell 1.5 million of them. That's a huge danger. That's a slew of constitutional amendments completely destroyed, on top of just the principle that you are deconstructing how law is passed in the United States and handing it to not an elected official or a handful of elected officials, but an unelected bureaucracy that the voters have no recourse for. That's scary, and that's one of the biggest threats to the republic as we know it, not just from the ATF side of things, but from a slew of other three-letter government agencies, and just the precedent that the ATF is spearheading in that way is horrible.
That's really interesting because I think that's something that's really new in this space, actually. Like, it's, you know, we talk about the weaponization of the ATF, we talk about what these agencies are doing, but I think one thing that isn't really common that you're touching on is that these rulemakings weren't really normal for the ATF more than a decade ago, right? I mean, the Bumpstock Rule that, you know, was passed under the Trump administration was not passed, in fact. The whole problem that was authored under the Trump administration was kind of the first big delve into that space for the ATF, but it is something that in other areas of constitutional law and other property rights contexts, you know, we've seen for a few decades. And so it's interesting that it's come to the gun rights space, but it's really interesting to me that that also kind of galvanized the space, right?
For sure.
That was a real big shift and a big push. I mean, I think you could point to that rule as almost a turning point in some of the culture shift. So I think it's interesting that that is kind of the focus now, especially after Congress really hasn't passed much by way of gun control in the past couple decades. They've really pushed it towards the agencies.
And not only that, yeah, I'll, no, 100% on that last part, absolutely. But especially more on that front, while federal Congress has been kind of in gridlock on it, a lot of state legislators have pushed things like constitutional carry, and there's been big wins in, you know, state Supreme Courts, in state, you know, state houses, state senates that are actually pushing toward more pro-gun legislation, which is really cool because for the first time, at least in my lifetime of monitoring this stuff, we're getting win after win, which is kind of nice to see. Not only just playing a defensive game of, you know, hey, let's not lose any more rights, let's not lose 30-round mags, let's not lose these things. We're going on the offensive and getting constitutional carry passed. Constitutional carry was a pipe dream in most places 10 years ago, and now there's constitutional carry in more states than not.
Yeah.
Which is wild to see. That happened very quickly.
Yeah. I mean, it's now the most common form of regulating or not regulating carry in the United States. I think we have 28 states now that I like to call it free carry.
Yeah.
Just because some states it's constitutional, some states it's not. A lot of people call it permitless carry.
Yeah.
But I hate the idea that we talk about it as if like the permit is the normal status quo.
Right.
When in fact, just being able to carry a gun is the normal status quo.
Yeah, it's a common sense carry law.
Yeah,
it's like
I like that.
I
like that.
Use their own verbiage against it. Common sense carry law.
Yeah, that's perfect.
I get to carry.
What's more common sense than that? So to that end, I think kind of twofold. You know, what do you see as the biggest boon for gun rights kind of coming up in these sort of uncertain times? What are you know, most hopeful about? And then what are you most concerned about as, you know, as a nation, we start to enter into some, where we've kind of been in uncertain times for a little while now, but we're certainly entering into even more uncertain times this year.
Yeah, I feel like the season finale's coming up before too long.
Did you watch 24 before, right? The dun 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 dun. I just feel
Jack
like
Bauer.
Yeah, I feel like every month or every time the news comes on, now I just hear like the 24.
I joke about it. I'm like, all right, time to consult the nightmare brick. Let's see what the federal government's doing now. I think the answer to that question is both. Because is the same for both, rather. Because I think what makes me most optimistic is to see the progress that we're making in states, and to see even in places like California, we're getting wins in the Supreme Court and stuff like that, or in federal courts. And on top of that, like just the dynamic. What I'm worried about most is the dynamic between the state and federal governments. Because, for example, slightly off topic of guns, but like the border situation that we saw with Governor Abbott, it's a state government standing up and putting a finger in the eye of the federal government, and a gridlock, and a bunch of other states getting involved and saying, no, we support that state. And it's a weird power dynamic we haven't seen in a long time. And so seeing that more and more in the fight for gun rights specifically has been very interesting too, because you have a lot of state governments that are going farther and farther, and you have federal agencies, like said, like these people who aren't legislators but are taking the role of legislators that are pushing farther and farther as well. And so you have an opposite dynamic of state and federal in a way that's becoming adversarial. And that's both the most refreshing thing about the fight, but also something that I'm keeping my eye on, because that's also a little weird.
Yeah, it can definitely be a little bit unsettling, but it is interesting to see states willing to flex their power. I mean, the Constitution has a fourth article, right? We always talk about the three branches in the first three articles, but of course the fourth article refers to the states.
Yes.
And talks about the power of the states. And, of course, the 10th Amendment reserves power to the states. So
very specifically, any powers that aren't granted by the federal government by the Constitution are reserved for the states.
yeah, it's almost like if you just read the Constitution, they would be able to figure these things out. But it's a miracle that we're now kind of coming to a head 250 years later, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a long time coming. We made it a quarter of a millennia before we, had to start revisiting some of these things. But
absolutely. So to that end too, what about in Texas? Do you think that is there anything in particular here that's more concerning, less concerning, is more heartening, is more worrisome, as opposed to just kind of the nation writ large? I know that Texas is one of those states that a lot of people in the country look to. I mean, when you're talking about the border, a lot of people in the country look to see, what way Texas is blowing and where the shift is there. So is there anything unique here?
So what's interesting about Texas is that it's not quite as conservative in certain areas as most people would assume. Like, we were one of the most recent states to get constitutional carry, and the constitutional carry that we got had a lot of asterisks to it. It wasn't pure constitutional carry. For example, there were a lot of provisions about places that, you weren't allowed to carry still, that, constitutional carry didn't apply to, and some severe penalties on that as well, like up to felony level. So there are some things that I'd like to see changed. I'd like to see still some changes made to the carry bill to kind of open that up to be a little bit more true constitutional carry. But yeah, there's a few things that, while Texas is a Republican stronghold, some of the laws aren't written as what we would consider to be very modern conservative, as far as like really staunch conservative, right? There's a lot of holdovers from times long gone that, Texas, like a lot of still seriously, like Old West style laws where, you ain't no wearing pistols in this saloon, boy, like stuff like that.
I'm convinced that Texas passed free carry, constitutional carry when it did, solely so that it was still amongst the first half of the states.
Yeah.
They just couldn't, Texas couldn't possibly fall to number 26, because then they'd have been in the second half.
Right.
And that would have just ruined the whole brand.
Yeah, I just don't understand. There's just certain things about the way that the legislature works sometimes in Texas, where you've got a decent Republican majority, but you have to bully Republicans into voting like Republicans sometimes. So, they've got an R in front of their name, but that doesn't always mean that they're the best choice and that actually they represent you. Of course, gun owners know that all too well. That's just because there's an R in front of the name doesn't mean you can trust them. They're not actively trying to shank you in the shins like the other people, but you gotta hold your elected representatives accountable to vote the way that you think they will. And when they don't, you primary them.
And of course, you're talking about a group of people who are enforcing and holding these laws, or they're enforcing these laws at the barrel of a gun.
Yeah.
Right? At the end of the day, all of these laws mean that if you fail to comply for long enough, they get to point a gun at you.
Yes.
And that's this terrifying.
Are we going to voluntarist theory right now? Let's do it.
We could dig we could go real deep. We could go real deep.
Non-aggression principle, and it only took us 30 minutes.
But it is really, I think a lot of people don't realize that. And that's something that, we've seen at, FPC and at FPC Action Foundation. Something that, you guys are talking about online, you talk about in your channel, fairly often. And that shift where people are now going, hey, it's not good enough to just be, of X party or of Y party. You need to be standing up for actual individual natural rights.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, like you said, you're only ever, 4 steps removed away from having a SWAT team raid your house for not complying with something. Because, First, they'll give you a citation or a warning. You still don't comply. They fine you. you say this is still wrong, I don't believe in this isn't what the Constitution says, then they follow up on that fine with a threat of imprisonment. You don't go, you get a SWAT team.
I think after this conversation, we're probably like maybe 2 steps. I don't think we get the full 4 steps anymore.
Oh, I still wonder, 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm getting a knock on my door. Like, oh, well, it's either a knock or a flashbang.
A little courtesy knock wouldn't be.
I mean, I'd at least appreciate, I appreciate, hell, I'd even appreciate the good old days of, I have a warrant.
Yeah.
Just basic things,
Yeah, those good old days where they actually followed the Constitution.
It'd be wild. It would be really cool to return to those days, I think.
Yeah. So speaking of, we've talked a little bit about the culture. We've talked a little bit about the agencies and the rulemaking process. Of course, being the resident attorney, and of course, doing what we do and what I do at FPC Action Foundation. I'd love to talk a little bit about courts and about law.
Sure, of course.
And so I'm interested, is there any court case or any legal issue that you're really paying attention to right now that you're really kind of following?
So it's kind of funny you say that, because you guys are the people that I look to for what is new and interesting in case law and anything. So really, I'm going to flip this back around on you. Is there anything I should be watching right now that's in the courts?
Okay, of course. I think...
Not to put you on the spot or anything.
No, it's almost like I walked into your studio and sat in front of a camera and put a mic on and then let you ask me things. I think that the biggest thing right now that a lot of people are paying attention to is the Mock V Garland case, which is that pistol brace case, that stabilizing brace case. I think that one's really big. Before that, we had the framer-receiver rule, which was, of course, aimed at the 80%er industry, the home manufacturing industry, and just preventing people from being able to manufacture their own arms.
Which people have been able to legally do since the founding of the country. There was never a law ever passed about it.
No, there wasn't ever even a question. It's barely discussed in the historical record at times. There are plenty of mentions of it, but it was just so assumed that it was a practice that people could engage in, and that people did engage in modifying their firearms.
And there's it's like almost an old mindset that I fucking love, which is more like, well, hell, I mean, if you can do it, I really can't stop you. Which is just not a thing anymore.
Yeah, and a lot of people think about law backwards, right? Like that. We have this conversation all the time where people go, oh, we'll point to a law that allowed you to do X.
Yeah, that drives me fucking crazy.
It's just completely backwards.
Where does it say you can do that? Excuse me?
I can do it until you tell me I can't, and if you tell me I can't, it might be unconstitutional.
I still might sue you.
Yeah. I, in fact, will sue you.
Yeah.
That's kind of my whole job.
It's almost like there's groups dedicated to suing you over this shit.
But so I really thought that the 80% suit, the framer-receiver rule, was going to be the one that drew attention, was going to galvanize people.
Yeah.
Because it was reaching into people's homes. And I thought that would really have an impact. But, we of course filed suit. We of course were successful in that case.
Which is awesome.
Thank you. And that one's Bumpstock V Garland. And it's in a bit of a weird place right now, but the federal government just petitioned for cert to the Supreme Court, meaning they're asking the court to hear the case, which means that we could be before the Supreme Court, come end of the year, this time next year.
Which is awesome. We have a really good stacked conservative Supreme Court right now, which I love. But the problem is that's not a win on itself, because the Supreme Court is only as good as the cases they decide to take. You know that all too well.
Yeah, that's really...
We can't take it for granted.
Exactly. Yeah, that's really important. It's the cases that's in front of them. It's how the issues are briefed. It's how the things are argued. It's the attorneys that are doing the arguing. A lot goes into, getting a case from filing a complaint at the district court to potentially getting the Supreme Court to grant cert. There's a lot of steps in there and a lot of work in between. But I really thought that case was going to be the one that drew attention, and it didn't as much as I expected. But pistol braces really pissed a lot of people off.
Yeah, because I think, if you have, I think it came down to the grandfathering aspect of that too, because people were like, oh no, I can't build another 80% receiver in the future, hypothetically. It's such a ethereal thing, but the 6 pistol braces I've got in my gun locker turning me into a felon, that's like it's an unregistered machine gun because it's an NFA violation. That's a $250,000 fine and 10 years in prison. Like that's a big fucking deal for most people. It's a
Yeah.
big fucking deal for anyone. So like I could see why that was the big one.
Yeah, that's a big hammer to swing, and I think the ATF really misstepped on that front. I don't think that they were expecting the response they got.
Yeah.
I think the rule is blatantly unlawful and unconstitutional. I think it was going to be struck down from the beginning, and we've had wins along the way, but really underestimated how people would react. And I think that's actually a really good point, is how many people had these sitting in safes?
Yeah.
How many people just had braces sitting in their closet? How many people have them, didn't even know necessarily what they were, where they fell legally, and then found out after the rule came out that they might possess something that just magically transformed into an NFA item?
Yep.
So I think that case is probably the one that most people are paying attention to, that has a lot of weight behind it.
Especially when you have, sorry if I could just
No,
add
yeah.
to that. Everybody says, ignorance of the law is no excuse. That only goes so far. Mm-hmm. Because when you've not passed a new law, and I don't want to keep harping on that,
Yeah.
but there was no new law passed.
Nope.
And when I bought the damn thing, I bought it at a legal gun store that it had a copy of the letter from the ATF saying it was legal for me to own. I mean, I don't know if they still do it, but the arm braces, I remember that I bought back before I had, an SOT, and, I still, I relied on that to have, an SBR. They came with that piece of paper where it was an approval letter from the ATF. So if it was legal when they bought it and no new law was even passed, even if they're a C-SPAN junkie, they would have no idea that it was against the law.
Mm-hmm. And how many people didn't? How many people bought them and just had no idea that it was, there was nothing to know, right?
Yeah.
They just bought a pistol, and magically 5 years later, 10 years later, depending on when they bought it, the ATF comes out and just says, actually, not only is that not a pistol, it's never been a pistol.
Right.
And only by our own grace are we not throwing you in prison, and
Yeah.
are we allowing you a period of time to bring it into compliance.
Eurasia has always been at war with East Asia. What are you talking about? That's never been a pistol.
Exactly.
We're being gaslit by the federal government.
Yeah, live, and you can watch it happen, which is just absolutely wild. The other interesting suits that I would say right now are, so we at FPC and FPC Action Foundation just filed 2 writs for, petitions for a writ of certiorari. And basically what that is, right, is that's when you go to the Supreme Court and ask the Supreme Court to take your case. The Supreme Court's basically the only federal court in the nation that decides what cases it's going to hear, and they only hear about 60 to 70 a year. Now, they used to hear more, which is its own interesting problem. But so
what is that? It's only as good as the cases they take?
It's only as good as the cases in front of it. So we just filed 2 petitions. One came from the Maryland so-called assault weapons ban. The other one came from Illinois and Illinois' magazine ban. And those are both up at the Supreme Court right now, which means there's a potential that the Supreme Court could grant certiorari, could grant review in one of those cases, and we could potentially have a, again, so-called assault weapons ban case in front of the Supreme Court as early as probably the start of next term, which is around, September, October of this year. And that would be huge, right? To have this court have the opportunity to directly apply both Heller and Bruin in a context where we're talking about, these semi-automatic rifles, pistols, shotguns.
Sure.
That would be huge. So those are the kind of, I asked for 1 case, you flipped it around, so I got to give you 4.
Okay, we got 4 for the price of 1, so I ain't concerned about it.
Yeah, I'll invoice you later.
There you go, yeah, now he's talking like an attorney.
So we've talked a lot, we've talked a lot about culture, we've talked some about regulation, we've talked about law, we've talked about courts. Everything always comes back to culture, right?
Yeah.
So Andrew Breitbart famously said, politics is downstream of culture.
Yep.
Well, courts is downstream of politics.
Yep.
And so really, if you look at it all comes back to the culture. And I think it's something that FPC Action Foundation, we focus on a lot, is not just the legal battles, but also battles in culture. So I'm curious, what do you think is the biggest cultural point in gun rights right now? What do you think is the most important thing over the next 8 to 12 months in the culture to ensure that we're having real, impactful conversations?
So I think it's already starting to happen. It's been happening for a while, but I think we're now seeing like the I guess the ultimate manifestation of that, which is the shift from gun ownership being I want a Glock in my nightstand and a shotgun for when I go turkey hunting, and you have the average gun owner now owns an AR-15. Mm-hmm. That's cool. That's sexy. The Modern Warfare 2 kids have grown up and they bought ACRs. Like this is. We're seeing that where no, that is the now. I hate the term because it's kind of like it's a cop out, but modern sporting rifle. Truly, the AR-15 is the modern sporting rifle, and it's not weird you're not the weird prepper uncle anymore if you have an assault weapon. You know, hell, you could have a closet with like 3 AR-15s that makes you a typical gun owner. Probably means you need a couple more guns, really. So being able to see that and to see modern pop culture kind of starting to embrace that, and it just becoming the ultimate funnel. Again, I know I keep talking about the funnel thing, but like we're bringing more and more people into guns that way, and it's not weird anymore.
Yeah.
The cultural conversation has changed. The Overton window on what is acceptable gun ownership has completely shifted, even in the last 15 years. And so you have a lot of these older FUDs who, you know, I care about my 1911 and I care about my pump shotgun. Don't care about AR-15, simple as. Like, that's going away.
Yeah.
Even the older folks are, you know, they're adopting AR-15s, AR-10s, you know, really modern weaponry. Mm-hmm. And so like that really changes the conversation as to what people are going to allow the government to infringe on. Because, you know, those boomer generations now who used to be like, well, you know, I don't see why an 18-year-old needs all that firepower is going away slowly but surely. And you can see it happen in front of you if you're paying attention. And it's really cool to see that not only is the conversation changing, but I feel like it's already changed.
Yeah.
You compare it to 10 years ago.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful thing to see people exercising their rights how they want to exercise their rights.
Yeah.
And it has an impact. I'll tell you, it has an impact on the court. Like what you're doing, you know, what you guys are doing, you know, what the community is doing does have an impact in courtrooms because it's cool to have an SBR now.
Yeah. It's
cool to have body armor now. And those are things, when those numbers change, those are things that come up in courtrooms.
Because I mean, what is it? I'm calling on your expertise here, but DCV Heller, it's in common use, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So basically anything that we put in common use becomes automatically protected under that ruling by the Second Amendment, by extension of the Supreme Court.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a trump card. So basically, it's protected anyway.
Right.
But there's this very clear statement from the court that you cannot ban anything that is, the only historical evidence for a ban is something that is both dangerous and unusual, and being the key word. So if you can go into court and show that something is not unusual, that something is in common use, then it's almost a trump card on the entire case, where it doesn't matter what the state tries to say. It doesn't matter what the feds try and say. The Supreme Court has already found that history says you cannot ban things that are not both dangerous and unusual. If it's in common use, it's not unusual.
Like, for example, I don't know, pistol braces with 1 to 2 million sold.
Yeah, which is a wild number in that case too, because they say there's like 3 million in circulation. There's a congressional report that came out that said somewhere between like 5 and 10. It's probably more like 40 million in reality. I
saw the low estimates. They were like, well, you know, there's probably about 100,000. I'm like, there's like 100,000 in Alabama, dude. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. I just want to thank you. Thank you for being willing to sit down with a lawyer and have a lawyer ask you questions on camera.
You might forget I started in law originally way back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was going to Campbell trying to be an attorney.
Yeah.
And that was a terrible idea. I'm glad I didn't do that.
Which is why I'm more surprised that you were, not less surprised that you were willing to sit down. But in all seriousness, thank you so much. I think it's it's really cool what you're doing in the culture. It's really cool that you're talking about these things. You know, you are having an impact. It does have an impact in courtrooms. And so that's why we just wanted to sit down with you and talk with you a little bit about what you were seeing and what you were experiencing. So,
and same, right back at you. Like we're fighting the same fight, but in different ways. And so
Absolutely.
it's really cool. You guys have respect for what we do. We respect what you guys do, and it's a wonderful symbiotic relationship, you know.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for taking the time.
Of course, man. It's always a pleasure.